An arrogant freelance musician, a conservative press secretary, and a grand piano. What began as a vicious mockery turned into a moment that silenced the room and shattered an ego. It all unfolded in the opulent lobby of the Willard InterContinental Hotel in Washington, D.C., at a political gala filled with laughter and lights. Caroline Levit, 27, the youngest White House press secretary in history, moved through the crowd with a polite smile. Her sharp gaze concealed a past few knew about. To most, she was the steely face of the Trump camp. But beneath that, music had once been a passion she buried. Then the doors swung open, and Ethan Caldwell strode in. A renowned pianist and a darling of the left, he entered with a smug grin and an air of arrogance. The clinking glasses and murmurs stopped as he marched straight to the piano in the corner. Without a greeting, Ethan locked eyes with Caroline, his voice ringing out. "Can the press secretary play, or does she just pound keys for Trump?" Laughter erupted from a few liberal journalists. Phones were raised, ready to capture the moment. Caroline felt the heat of their stares, but she stood still, hands clenched. Ethan tilted his head, taunting further. "Show us some real talent, if you've got any." The crowd held its breath, the air thick. This was no ordinary evening. It was a showdown that would change everything. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Ethan Caldwell stood there, hands resting lightly on the grand piano, his gaze fixed on Caroline Levit like a hunter eyeing prey. The crowd's laughter still hung in the air of the Willard InterContinental lobby, mingling with the clink of glasses and the whispers of curious guests. He didn't rush. Ethan knew how to stretch a moment, turning it into his own stage. To him, this wasn't just a jab. It was a chance to topple a conservative icon in full public view. "Don't be shy, Miss Levit," Ethan said, his tone smooth but cutting like a blade. "I hear you're good at sparring with reporters. Surely you've got some talent to spice up that White House podium, right?" He tapped a few keys, random notes ringing out as if daring her to step up. "Or is it all just hot air?" Caroline stood frozen, feeling the floor beneath her tremble. The chandeliers above cast light on her sleek black dress, but now it felt like armor under scrutiny. She glanced around. Liberal journalists, phones in hand and smirks on their faces, waited for her to crash. A few conservative politicians murmured to each other, eyes wary. She'd faced attacks before, but this was different. Ethan wasn't just hitting her role, he was digging into something deeper, something she'd buried long ago. Ethan stepped away from the piano, arms spread like a Broadway star. "Picture this," he said, his voice rising to pull the room in. The White House press secretary, mouthpiece of MAGA, sits down and plays a tune. What'll it be? A New Hampshire folk song? Or just some clumsy keyboard banging? Laughter broke out again, louder, sharper. A reporter shouted, "Play something, Caroline," as if this were a gladiator game. Caroline felt the blood rush to her face. She was no stranger to pressure, tense White House briefings, TV interviews, defending Trump's divisive policies. But this was alien territory. Ethan didn't just want her to fail. He wanted her humiliated, a laughingstock for the cameras and ex-posts. She took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. But inside, an old memory stirred. As a kid in New Hampshire, Caroline had spent hours at the church's worn piano, its yellowed keys a refuge for her worries. She played hymns, then taught herself classics from borrowed library books. But as she grew, her family told her politics was the practical path, not artistic dreams. She shelved her passion, seeing it as a weakness unfit for the tough image she built with Trump. Now, facing Ethan, she felt those notes hum in her mind, a reminder of who she'd once been. She flicked her eyes off Ethan for a second, glancing at her Trump team nearby. An aide shook his head slightly, whispering, "Don't do it, Caroline. It's a trap. The media will tear you apart if you flop." She knew he was right. If she played badly, headlines would scream, "Trump's press secretary flops hard on stage." But if she backed down, Ethan would win. He'd brand her a coward, and the left would have fresh ammo against the administration. Ethan caught her hesitation, and his grin widened. He returned to the piano, playing a brief snippet of Moonlight Sonata. The low notes were a mocking echo. "See?" he said, stopping and staring at her. That's real music, not political clownery, but I get it. You're too busy defending Trump's outdated policies to learn. The crowd buzzed, a few clapping, while Caroline's throat went dry. She looked down at her hands, fingers once fluent on keys, now more at home on laptops and mics. Then Trump's voice echoed in her head. Never let them see you weak, Caroline. Fight back. Always fight back. She'd lived by that in every political battle, from her days with Elise Stefanik to White House briefings. How was this any different? Just another foe, another weapon. Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping but still audible to all. You know, I've played for social justice events, stuff you and your boss sneer at, but I bet you don't have a clue what real art is. Prove me wrong, if you dare. He pointed to the piano like it was a Roman arena, and she, a gladiator, forced to fight. The pressure mounted. The crowd's laughter buzzed in her ears like bees. Phones rose higher, flashes popping. Her aide, Mark, whispered again, Walk away, Caroline. Don't let him win like this. But Ethan's eyes, arrogant, daring, as if certain she'd run, lit a fire in her. She couldn't let him win that easily. Not tonight. Not in front of everyone. Caroline took a deep breath, her gaze locking onto Ethan. Fine, she said, her voice low but clear, slicing through the noise. Watch yourself. Caroline Levit stood there, her eyes locked on Ethan Caldwell. Her challenge, watch yourself, hung in the air of the Willard InterContinental lobby. The crowd went quiet for a beat, then whispers erupted like waves rippling through silk-draped tables and glittering chandeliers. Ethan smirked, but his smile wasn't as sure now. A flicker of unease crossed his face, as if he'd just realized he might have ignited something beyond his control. Oh, fantastic, Ethan said, his voice still smooth but tinged with strain. He turned back to the piano, patting its lid like an invitation. I'm really looking forward to this. Don't let us down, Miss Levit, or should I say, spokesperson of the Keys. A few chuckles came from the liberal reporter's corner, but they lacked the earlier gusto. The crowd was waiting, and Caroline felt the weight of every stare. She took a small step forward, her heels clicking on the polished wood floor. Inside, though, she wasn't sure. Her heart pounded, threatening to break through her chest. This wasn't the White House briefing room, where she could lean on facts and wit to strike back. This was a bare stage where every slip would be ruthlessly exposed. She glanced at Mark, her aide still nearby. His eyes were almost pleading, Don't do this, Caroline. Get out now. She knew what he was thinking. If she crashed, it would be a perfect gift for the liberal media, a viral clip to mock her and Trump. But then, Ethan's words echoed back. I bet you don't have a clue what real art is. It wasn't just a taunt. It was a knife to her pride. Who did he think she was? A soulless, political puppet? No depth? No talent? She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Number. She couldn't let him win like that. She couldn't let him turn her into a punchline in front of everyone, her supporters, herself. Another memory flashed. Not the church piano days, but her first real taste of pressure, working for Elise Stefanik. She'd once been ambushed by a liberal reporter at a briefing, branded Trump's ignorant mouthpiece. She'd stood her ground, firing back with calm precision, leaving him speechless. Trump had patted her shoulder after, saying, You've got guts, Caroline. Never let them bring you down. Now, facing Ethan, she wondered, how was this different? Just another enemy, another battlefield. But then fear crept in. How long had it been since she touched a piano? Those practice nights in a cramped New Hampshire room were a hazy memory. Her hands were used to typing emails, gripping mics, not gliding over black and white keys. What if she played badly? What if she forgot mid-song? She pictured herself fumbling, awkward at the piano, and heard Ethan's laugh, the left's cheers, the disappointment from Trump's camp. Probably thinking of an exit already? Ethan said, cutting through her thoughts. He stepped closer, his tone mock sympathetic. It's okay, I get it. Not everyone's brave enough for this stage. Maybe stick to those pre-written speeches. He shrugged, turning away as if it were over, but his eyes flicked back over his shoulder, watching her next move. That was the last straw. Caroline felt a fire flare in her chest. Not fear, but rage. He thought she'd run. He thought she was that weak. She wasn't a quitter. She'd faced bigger foes than Ethan. Reporters accusing her of lies. Politicians calling her a pawn. And she'd always held firm. This wasn't the time to back down. She took a deep breath, pushing back every doubt. "I don't need a second invitation," she said, her voice ringing clear, cutting through the crowd's noise. She walked to the piano, each step heavy but resolute. The crowd held its breath. Mark's eyes widened in shock, while Ethan turned back, the smile on his lips faltering. "Are you serious?" he asked, but his voice now lacked certainty. Caroline didn't answer. She pulled out the chair, sat before the grand piano, and rested her hands lightly on the glossy black and white keys. Beneath the Willard InterContinental lobby chandelier light, the crowd's murmurs faded, leaving only the sound of held breaths and her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan Caldwell stood a few steps away, arms crossed, his smirk still lingering, but now tinged with doubt. He'd pushed her into this, and now she had to respond, not with words, but with music. She closed her eyes for a second, inhaling deeply to steady the tremble in her hands. The cold keys under her fingers stirred distant memories. Afternoons in that New Hampshire church, where she'd played simple hymns before secretly tackling complex pieces from tattered books. She hadn't played in years, but her hands still remembered. They had to. She had no other choice. Caroline opened her eyes, her fingers starting to move. She chose Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, a piece not just beautiful but fierce, quintessentially American, matching her bold spirit. The first notes rang out, slowly, hesitantly, like a self-questioning whisper. The sound filled the space, soft yet clear, drawing the crowd's attention from curiosity to utter silence. Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised she'd actually begun, but he held his mocking expression, muttering something to someone nearby. But then Caroline found her rhythm. She leaned forward, her right hand racing over intricate chords, her left anchoring deep, steady beats. The music came alive, high notes soaring alongside powerful low, like a story told through keys. She wasn't just playing, she was living each note. The crowd began to feel it. A few leaned forward, eyes wide. Phones once raised to mock, now recorded in awe. A memory surged mid-melody. She recalled a rainy night in New Hampshire, at 15, sitting in a small room with that old piano. Her mother, weary from a long shift, had listened to her play a piece she'd composed. "You've got talent, Caroline," she'd said, her voice hoarse but warm. "Don't let anyone take it away." But Caroline had let it go herself, for family, for politics, for the tough image she thought she needed. Now, facing Ethan and the crowd, she realized she'd been wrong. Talent wasn't weakness, it was strength. The music swelled, climbing to Rhapsody and Blues climax. Caroline's fingers flew across the keys, fast and precise, astonishingly so. She no longer trembled. She'd found herself again. The sound poured out like a river, washing away fear and doubt. She didn't look at Ethan, didn't look at the crowd, just her and the piano, like the old days. But she knew they were listening. She felt the shift in the air, from mockery to awe, from skepticism to admiration. Ethan stopped muttering. He stood there, arms dropping, eyes fixed on Caroline. His smile was gone, replaced by an unreadable look, half shock, half irritation. He was a professional musician performing worldwide. But what Caroline played now wasn't just technique. It had soul, and he couldn't deny it. A conservative politician in the crowd leapt up, clapping mid-piece, unable to hold back. Others followed, scattered applause breaking the silence. Caroline didn't notice. She was lost in the finale, high notes blending with resonant chords, crafting an ending both fierce and free. She tilted her head with the rhythm, hair falling across her face, sweat beading on her brow. This wasn't White House Caroline, the cool, sharp spokesperson. This was the Caroline of freer days when music was everything. She struck the final note, its echo filling the lobby before fading into the air. She sat still, hands on the keys, breathing hard. A second of silence stretched, as if the room waited for someone to break the spell. Then applause exploded, not scattered now, but a tidal wave of sound crashing through the lobby. Conservative politicians stood, cheering loudly. Even some liberal reporters clapped, reluctantly. Mark, her aide, gaped, his eyes shifting from worry to pride. Shouts rang out, "Caroline! Amazing!" From one corner, sparking more cheers. Caroline looked up, meeting the crowd's eyes for the first time. She saw stunned faces, admiring smiles, and confused looks from those who'd mocked her. She didn't smile, not from arrogance, but because she was still processing what had happened. She'd done it. She'd stepped through fear, through taunts, and turned it into something greater. Then her gaze found Ethan. He still stood there, hands in pockets, his face stiff as he tried to stay composed. But she saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the way he bit his lip to hide a real reaction. He hadn't expected this. He'd wanted her a laughingstock, but now he was the one, silenced. Ethan clapped slowly, the sound lost in the crowd's roar. "Not bad," he said, loud enough for her to hear, but the arrogance was gone. Caroline stood, pushing the chair back, her legs still shaky but her back straight. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The piano had spoken for her. The applause still echoed through the Willard InterContinental lobby as Caroline Levit stepped away from the piano, her footing firmer than when she'd sat down. The sound of Rhapsody in Blue lingered in the air, a potent aftershock that left the room vibrating. She didn't look at Ethan Caldwell right away. She didn't need to. The crowd's cheers, the stunned looks on faces that had once sneered, it all said it. She'd turned his challenge into her triumph. Ethan stood a few steps from the piano, hands still in pockets, but his posture was stiffer now. The smirk that had been his weapon was completely gone, replaced by a forced neutral expression. He clapped slowly, his sporadic claps drowned out by the crowd's thunder. "Not bad," he repeated, a bit louder, as if to insist he still held control. But no one cared. His eyes flicked to Caroline, then darted away, as if lingering would admit defeat more plainly. Caroline paused near her original spot, turning to face the crowd. The applause had settled into a steady wave, mixed with shouts from conservative politicians. "That's our Caroline!" A middle-aged man, maybe a senator, yelled, pumping his fist. Others nodded, patting each other's shoulders, eyes gleaming with pride. Mark, her aide, stepped closer, tapping her shoulder. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, but his grin betrayed his awe. "But damn, you played great." Not everyone cheered. In a far corner, a cluster of liberal reporters whispered among themselves, phones still up but smirks gone. One, a woman with short, red-dyed hair, shook her head and typed furiously. "She's better than I thought," she said to a colleague, her tone surprised yet annoyed. "But it doesn't change anything. She still trumps." Another nodded, but his eyes stayed on Caroline, as if reassessing her. They might not like her, but they couldn't deny what had just happened. The lobby's noise softened, though the energy lingered. A few approached Caroline, shaking hands. "I had no idea you could play like that," an older woman, likely a conservative donor, said with a marveling tone. "You made us so proud." Caroline nodded, offering a faint smile. Not arrogance, but relief. Adrenaline still coursed through her, but she had it under control now. Then she turned to Ethan. He'd moved from the piano, now standing with a small group, probably friends or fans. A young man in the group patted his shoulder, whispering something, but Ethan just shrugged, feigning calm. "I told you," he said, loud enough for Caroline to hear. "Not bad, for a conservative." But the words fell flat, unanswered. His group exchanged awkward glances. One, a woman in a green dress, tilted her head toward Caroline and murmured, "She really caught you off guard, Ethan." Ethan didn't reply immediately. He took a sip from a glass someone handed him, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for a way to regain the upper hand. But there was none. The crowd had chosen Caroline's side, not just conservatives, but neutrals who doubted her. An older man, maybe an independent journalist, approached her, holding a small mic. "Miss Levit, where'd you learn to play like that?" he asked, voice genuine. "That was incredible." Caroline smiled faintly. "Thanks. I learned a long time ago, but I never forgot." Meanwhile, outside the lobby, phones buzzed nonstop. Social media had erupted. Trump supporters on X posted clips of Caroline playing, Captioned, "Our press secretary just crushed the left with talent." A big influencer wrote, "Caroline Levit, MAGA's secret weapon. Who's laughing now?" Hashtags like Warchalk Caroline Plays and MAGA music spread fast, racking up hundreds of shares in minutes. Even some neutral accounts chimed in. "Not a Trump fan, but I've got to admit, she's good." Ethan glanced over his shoulder, as if sensing the shift out there. He frowned, gripping his glass tighter. "They're overreacting," he said to his group, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd wanted Caroline as a punchline, but now he was the one cornered. His young friend from earlier smirked. "You miscalculated, Ethan. She didn't just play, she dominated." Caroline heard it, though she didn't react. She gave Ethan one last look, her gaze calm but piercing. She didn't need to say a word. Her performance had dismantled his arrogance. Ethan met her eyes, and for the first time, he couldn't hold his confident facade. He turned away, muttering to his group, then headed for the drink table, as if escaping her stare. The Willard InterContinental lobby slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the air still carried the excitement from Caroline Levit's performance. Laughter and chatter grew livelier, and the crowd's eyes now turned to her, not with curiosity or mockery, but with respect mixed with surprise. Caroline stood amid congratulations, shaking hands with a few supporters. But her mind was starting to settle. She'd just done something no one, not even herself, thought possible. Mark, her aide, stayed close, now fully relaxed after his initial worry. "You know," he said, a chuckle in his voice, "I was picturing the liberal media tearing us apart tonight, but you turned it into a win. A big one." He held up his phone, the screen lit with notifications from X. "Look at this. They're calling you the Queen of MAGA. That video's passed 10,000 views already." Caroline glanced over, seeing posts like, "Caroline Levit crushes the left with keys, and this is why we win." She gave a faint smile but said nothing. She hadn't played to win anyone over. She'd played for herself. A group of Trump supporters surrounded her, voices buzzing with enthusiasm. "You gave that liberal a lesson," an older man said, clapping her shoulder. "He thought he could embarrass you, but you made us so proud." Another woman jumped in. "I'll tell this story to the world. Our press secretary's a real artist." Caroline nodded, thanking them, but her eyes scanned the crowd, seeking Ethan Caldwell. He'd vanished from the room's corner, likely dodging her gaze, and the attention he no longer controlled. Out there on social media, the storm hadn't stopped. Posts from conservatives kept spreading, turning her performance into a symbol of MAGA strength. A big influencer wrote, "Caroline doesn't just talk, she acts." The left wanted to take her down, but they lost. Even neutral accounts joined in, one saying, "I don't like Trump, but credit where it's due." She's got talent. Not everyone praised her, though. A liberal reporter posted, "Playing piano well doesn't fix Trump's bad policies. Don't let this stunt fool you." But even that critique couldn't dim the moment's heat. Caroline stepped away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner near a large window overlooking Washington, D.C. streets. She needed to breathe, to think. The lobby's noise still hummed, but now she only heard her heartbeat, slow and steady. She'd done it, not just beating Ethan, but conquering her own fear. She recalled sitting at the piano, those first notes ringing out, when she thought she'd fail. But she hadn't. She'd reclaimed a piece of herself, one she'd buried since her New Hampshire days. She pulled out her phone, texting her husband, Nicholas. "Guess what I just did?" She smiled, imagining his reaction. The quiet man, 32 years her senior, was always her biggest fan. Later, she left the event, heading back to their small apartment outside D.C. Stepping inside, she saw Nicholas in the living room, their months-old son asleep in a crib beside him. "I heard about it," Nicholas said, standing to hug her. "Social media is going wild over you." Caroline laughed, feeling truly at ease for the first time tonight. "I didn't mean to make it a big deal," she said, sitting by the old piano in the corner, a piece she'd rarely touched since moving here. Nicholas tilted his head, nudging her. "Play it. I want to hear." She hesitated, then sat down, hands on the keys. She played a short bit of Rhapsody in Blue. Not fierce like in the lobby, but soft, private. Nicholas smiled, and she looked at their son, thinking, someday he'd hear this story. When she stopped, Nicholas asked, How do you feel? Caroline paused, then said, like I just remembered who I am. She'd once thought music was a weakness, unfit for her tough press secretary role. But tonight changed that. It wasn't something to hide. It was part of her, a strength she could carry even in the fiercest political battles. She stood, gazing out the window into the night. Ethan might have lost tonight, but she knew the left wouldn't stop. They'd find other ways to attack her, to bring down her and Trump. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She'd faced one of her foes, not with words or strategy, but with her true self. And she'd won. Back at work tomorrow, she'd step into the briefing room with new confidence. Not just Trump's spokesperson, she was Caroline Levit, who just reminded the world she wasn't only a political face. She was an artist, a fighter, and she wouldn't let anyone forget it. The piano in her mind still echoed, a testament that she could do anything, even with the world watching. Ethan Caldwell left the Willard InterContinental lobby in silence, his steps quicker than usual, as if eager to escape the eyes and applause still ringing behind him. Washington, D.C. streetlights lit his face, no longer sporting that arrogant smirk, but instead a scowl he couldn't hide. He'd lost, not in a debate he could twist or a war of words he could win, but in the one thing he prided himself on, music. And the one who beat him was none other than Caroline Levit, someone he'd pegged as a soulless political puppet. He stepped into a small bar a few blocks from the hotel where his friends had gathered post-event. The air was warmer, hazy under yellow lights and soft jazz from the speakers, but it couldn't soothe the thorn stabbing his pride. Ethan slumped into a chair, ordered a whiskey, and took a long sip before anyone could speak. His friends, a few musicians, a freelance reporter, and a social activist, watched him, their eyes a mix of curiosity and unease. Mia, the friend in the green dress who'd stood by him in the lobby, spoke first. Her tone was gentle, but it carried a probing edge. "Ethan, you okay?" Ethan shrugged, trying to keep his cool. "Okay? Of course I'm okay," he said, but his voice was tighter than he meant it to be. "She played a song. So what? It doesn't mean anything. Just the crowd overreacting." He took another sip of whiskey, as if the burn could wash away the obvious truth he didn't want to face. But Liam, the younger guy in the group, wouldn't let him off easy. He smirked, leaning forward. "Overreacting? Ethan, she crushed you. You dared her to play, and she didn't just play. She got the whole room on its feet clapping. You misjudged her." Liam shook his head, his look teasing yet serious. "I've never seen you that quiet on stage. She really threw you off." Ethan gripped his whiskey glass, his eyes darkening. He wanted to argue, to say Liam was wrong, that it was just a political stunt by conservatives to prop Caroline up. But he couldn't. He'd stood there watching her play Rhapsody in Blue with a confidence and emotion even he, a pro musician, had to admit was striking. He'd wanted her to flop, to fumble at the keys so he could laugh and walk off victorious. But she didn't. She'd made him the fool, in front of everyone. "Don't exaggerate," Ethan snapped, turning to Liam. "She's Trump's lackey. She can play piano all day, but it doesn't change a thing. Their policies are still trash, and I'm still right about everything I said." He leaned back, trying to reclaim his usual swagger, but Mia tilted her head, her gaze sharper. "You sure, Ethan? Because it didn't just look like you lost a little game tonight. You underestimated her, and now everyone knows it." Mia's words cut straight into Ethan's pride. He opened his mouth to retort, but stopped. In his mind, he saw Caroline at the piano, hands flying over the keys, eyes focused, and the roar of applause when she finished. He hated admitting it, but she hadn't just played to beat him. She'd played like it was all she had, and he couldn't deny the power in that. He took another sip of whiskey, the burn down his throat not enough to erase the unease. Later, Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling X to gauge the damage. He winced at the flood of posts praising Caroline. Press secretary, school's liberal musician. Caroline Levit proves MAGA's got talent. Then he paused at his own post from hours earlier, before the event. "Tonight, I'll show conservatives what real art is." He let out a dry laugh, mocking himself. "Real art," he muttered. "What a joke." He typed a quick new post. "Caroline Levit played well. I'll give her that. But don't let the keys make you forget her politics. They're still as wrong as ever." He hit send, watching the words pop up with a flicker of satisfaction. It was the only way he could salvage some dignity, acknowledge her skill but hold his ground. He set the phone down, looking at his friends. There, he said. I'm not letting her win completely. Mia raised an eyebrow. You sure? Because I think she's already won. Not just tonight, but in the eyes of everyone out there. Ethan didn't reply. He stared out the window, his gaze distant. He knew Mia was right, but he couldn't admit it. Not to them, not to himself. Caroline might have silenced him on stage, but he wouldn't let her take everything. He was still Ethan Caldwell, musician, activist, man of the left. And he'd find another way to fight back. Just not tonight. Ethan Caldwell might have left the bar with his whiskey and the scraps of his pride. But the story from that night at the Willard InterContinental didn't end with him. Caroline Levit had stepped onto the stage, faced the mockery of an arrogant liberal musician, and used her own talent to shut him down. She didn't just play the piano. She proved something bigger. Talent and strength aren't confined by political lines. Whether you stand with conservatives or liberals, while Ethan tried to salvage his dignity with a late ex-post, Caroline had left an indelible mark, not just on the crowd, but on herself. This story isn't just about a performance or a showdown. It's about overcoming prejudice, from others and from within. Ethan saw Caroline as unworthy of art, a Trump puppet with no depth. But she showed him, and the world, who she was. A strong woman, a hidden artist, a fighter unafraid to rise when challenged. She didn't need words to strike back. Her piano did the talking, loud and clear. And Ethan, though reluctant to admit it, couldn't deny that. The message here is plain. Don't let anyone define your worth, no matter where they stand on the political or life spectrum. Caroline once hid her love for music, thinking it didn't fit her role. Ethan thought he was superior because of his ideals. Both were wrong. Talent and grit don't care about the labels you wear. You can be anyone, an office worker, an artist, a dreamer, and still have the power to shake the room if you dare to step up. So what about you? What are you hiding because you fear judgment? A dream? A talent? A piece of yourself? Share it in the comments. I want to hear your story. Don't wait for someone like Ethan to challenge you into action. Take inspiration from Caroline and start today. If you like this story, hit subscribe for more journeys of breaking limits. Who knows? Next time, it could be your story. The tale of Caroline Levit and Ethan Caldwell mirrors the deep polarization in American society today, where politics doesn't just divide opinions, but shapes how people judge each other's worth. Ethan, an arrogant liberal musician, challenged Caroline, the conservative press secretary, to play piano as a taunt, reflecting a common U.S. trend, labeling and underestimating others based on ideology. Like how liberals often see conservatives as culturally shallow, or vice versa. But when Caroline sat down and played Rhapsody in Blue with raw emotion, she didn't just silence Ethan. She shattered that stereotype, reminding us that talent and humanity transcend party lines. The social media explosion afterward, with hashtags like #Caroline Plays and praise for conservatives, shows the power of media to amplify every moment, a familiar reality in digital age America. The lesson here is this. Don't let political labels or others' mockery stop you from showing who you are. Ethan lost because he underestimated Caroline. She won because she stepped up, despite her fear, like when her hands shook at the keys but she played anyway. In today's America, where social media pressure and political divides can make you hide your passions or opinions, take a cue from Caroline. Face the challenge. Whether it's an arrogant coworker or a nasty ex, comment. Let your talent and resilience speak, like she did in the Willard InterContinental lobby. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's next. See you in the upcoming video.